Welcome to Next Gen VC, a podcast from Gen Zs to Gen Zs. We aim to be the transparent window into the mysterious world of VCs and startups through the authentic conversations with the very individuals that make them. Today we welcome Amy, a former investment manager at Wave Ventures, a pre-seed fund that invests in Nordic startups, changing the way millennials and Gen Z live. Awarded as one of Sifted's top 10 Gen Z investors in Europe, Amy moved to Finland when she was 15 and has spent time in the startup and VC world ever since. If you enjoy our content, do support us by hitting the follow button and give us a follow on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram at NextGenVCPod for updates on the latest episodes. Are you tired of always hearing about Silicon Valley VCs and not knowing what the greats of European VC are thinking? Well, no more. Head over to theeuropeanvc.com, the go-to place for everything European VC. You'll find podcasts, events, and expert-curated content from all over the EUVC scene. Well, what are you waiting for? Go to theeuropeanvc.com now.
Hi, Amy. We're really excited to have you on the Next Gen VC podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before anything else, firstly, huge congratulations on being featured in Sifted as one of the top European Gen Z investors. Can you tell us a bit more about how the article came about and how you were featured?
Yeah, so I got mentioned to the reporter from someone that I know, and then Sifted contacted me to ask some questions, and that's how the article came about.
That's amazing. We're really happy for you, Amy. And when we first met a few weeks ago, one thing that really struck me was your super unconventional career journey. Could you tell us a little bit more about why you decided to move halfway across the world from Vietnam at such a young age, and why, out of all places, Finland?
Yeah, sure. So to your first question, my answer is pretty simple. It's curiosity that made me want to move. So, having been living in the same place for 18 years, I simply wanted to see more of the world and live independently. So that's why I decided to move out of Vietnam. And to your second question, why Finland? I would say it's because Finland is known for being the happiest country in the world and for having one of the best education systems as well. As simple as that. So, when you're 18, you really don't think a lot when you take risks. For example, I didn't care at all about the weather or the population density and so on. What I saw was only a great opportunity for me to grow. And also financially speaking, it's quite reasonable to stay in Finland as well.
And did you find that it's the happiest country in the world?
I agree. People are super chill, super happy, and work-life balance is very good there as well.
That sounds great. And would you be able to tell us a bit more about how you started your career in VC, how you stumbled into what many see as quite an opaque industry?
Yeah, so there are two events that sparked my interest in VC. First was Shark Tank. So, I happened to come across a Shark Tank video on YouTube and ended up watching a lot of other episodes. I love the entrepreneurs and the ideas presented, but what's even more exciting for me was when the sharks asked questions. I love how intellectually challenging those questions were and was like, I want to be like them. Later on, when I was working for a startup in Berlin, I was presenting the company at some startup events. And again, I got to meet some VCs who were interested in our company. I realized once more that I really loved their job. I love how they were going from booth to ask tricky questions. And for me, that looks super exciting. So those two were the two events that sparked my interest in VC.
That's amazing. And can you tell us a little bit more about the VC and startup ecosystem in Finland? And the reason I ask is because I met a Finnish friend recently, and he told me that literally everyone in the startup ecosystem there went to the same conference, and everyone seems to know everyone there.
Yeah, that's very true. So what's very unique about the startup ecosystem in Finland is the student-driven nature of it. The conference that you mentioned is probably Slush, and again, it was run entirely by students and recent grads. There were also a lot of other big student-run initiatives like Junction Hackathon or AutoES community. And by being involved in those initiatives, the students get inspired and equipped with the skills that they need to build great companies. So, for example, Miki Kusi, the co-founder and CEO of Volt, a 7 billion company that was just sold to DoorDash, was an alum of Slush and AutoES. So I think, it's very unique of Finland to have this student-driven culture, and also the fact that everyone knows everyone because it's a very small community after all.
That student-driven culture is indeed very fascinating because I remembered in our last conversation, you mentioned that Finland is one of the best places to start your career. Do you mind telling us why?
Yeah, so I think the biggest reason is somehow related to the point that I just made. So in Finland, students and young people alike are never looked upon. We're given a lot of trust and able to do whatever we want. When I was a student investor, for example, I met a lot of startups that are run by experienced founders and researchers, but they never underestimated me. Instead, they really value the unique perspectives that us, Gen Z, can bring to the table. And for this reason, I think for a career starter, Finland is a very great place because you're going to do a lot of things. You're given a lot of trust and authority to grow and to do whatever we want and to make an impact at a very early stage.
Do you think that, being Vietnamese and being a woman is kind of a barrier to being successful in Finland, especially, having flown from half the other side of the world to start your career in a country which you probably didn't know very much about when you first set foot? And how did you kind of go about tackling, getting your career up from the ground?
I think being a Vietnamese is, of course, a challenge. So, before coming to Finland, I've never watched an ice hockey match or never gone skiing. And so when people talk about those, I couldn't really join the conversations, right? And what's also new is the very Finnish concept of personal space. In Vietnam, we're a lot more community oriented, and that means sometimes you have to sacrifice your personal space. So, for example, if you ever board a flight to Vietnam, you will see that people talk a lot to strangers on flights. They make friends on flights, and that is unheard of in Finland. So, when I came here, I had to really learn how to respect people's personal space. So, there are certain cultural differences that I have to adapt and that I have to learn also. But that being said, those are not very big cultural challenges because, again, you can learn and adapt as long as you stay curious and open minded. So, to your question, how I went about getting my career off the crowd here in Finland is really just about being open minded, curious, learn, adapt, and also networking is very important.
I just have to say that you have a very fascinating and contrarian way of thinking, Amy, because I think a lot of international students, when they're considering where to start their career or even where to go to university, people always think of the States, Australia, or London. And I'm wondering if maybe one of the reasons is the language. Do you feel like speaking Finnish is something that's a necessity, essentially, for you to be able to work in Finland?
I would say no and yes. So to do your job well, you don't really need to speak Finnish because a lot of companies use English as the corporate language. However, if you want to get along well with your colleagues, I think speaking Finnish would be very helpful because it shows your Finnish colleagues that you're truly curious and interested in their country. So it's no and yes to your question.
And have you started to learn Finnish? Can you speak any Finnish?
Oh, yeah, I can speak a little bit of Finnish. Actually, before coming to the podcast, I've just finished a Finnish class.
Oh, that's super cool. And do you think investing in Finland, being a smaller country in Europe, the tech scene, as you said, everyone seems to know everyone. Do you think that that's challenging at times? Because, if you're a VC sourcing the best deals, there's probably less deals happening in Finland than somewhere like London or Berlin, where they're kind of more of a startup hub in Europe. And how do you go about navigating that whole space of finding the best deals in such a small ecosystem?
I think there's no VC fund in Finland that only invests in Finnish companies. Usually they would look at the Nordics or the whole Europe. Wave Ventures, where I worked, for example, we invest in Nordic startups, so not just Finnish startups. No VC fund really invests in only Finnish startups. And investing in Finland, I think is very interesting because, it's easier to get access to deals and also to do reference checks because, again, everyone knows everyone, right? So people go to the same conferences and know the same few people. So in a way, I think is so much easier.
And I guess part of that's down to networking. And you mentioned earlier how important that is when you're starting your career. Do you have any tips for our listeners about, how to build your network in VC? Because relationships are really, really important.
Yeah, I think probably there are two tips. The first one is to start with people that you know. So, even though you're coming to a completely new country, you probably know some people who knows people that live there already. So I think the best way is to start asking people that you know first, ask them to introduce you to their acquaintances. When you look for jobs, for example, go to people that you know, ask them if they know anyone in tech or VC, and then ask them to make introductions. Then the second tip would be maybe not afraid to reach out. So when I do networking, I reach out a lot. I go to people when I am at a conference, or I even send a lot of LinkedIn requests. It may be intimidating at first, but I think, just go ahead and do your network.
No, that's great advice. It's definitely all about taking the first step. You'd be surprised that people in VC are actually quite keen to answer random cold calls. I know that Ved and I at least have done that quite a lot. So I guess I was wondering, you mentioned that, investing in Finland is quite interesting. Is there any particular sectors that are especially exciting in the Nordics or even Finland itself?
Yeah, so I think in Finland, gaming is still big. We have a lot of game studios, and also Supercell, one of the European unicorn, is also doing games, and they are from Finland. Finland is also strong in health tech and clean tech, I think. And Web3/crypto is an emerging sector.
Got it. So anyone who wants to go to Web3 or crypto or clean tech, do head to Finland and find Amy. And Amy, the other thing that I really wanted to discuss with you was that, you and I are both in a part of a fellowship called Included VC. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about that. First of all, could you maybe describe a little about what the fellowship is?
So Included VC is a fully funded global fellowship for aspiring VCs from diverse communities that are often overlooked. So, for example, women or people of color from all over the world, they provide knowledge into the world of venture capital through a series of masterclasses, mentoring, and even investment committee simulations. It's a super great fellowship, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely recommend it to anyone who wants to join VC. I'd like to ask a little bit more for those who are interested. What's the application process like?
So I think what's unique about Included VC is that we have applied application process. That means we don't collect CVs, age, and name at the first stage to be fair as possible. So you just need to answer some questions, and then after that, you can be invited to interviews.
And could you tell us a bit more about what the cohort's like and your relationship with kind of the other people you've met through the program?
So my cohort was relatively small and close-knit. We had around 20 fellows from very different backgrounds, including entrepreneurs, startup operators, scientists, researchers, and so on. we still keep in touch after the fellowship, not only to help each other, but also to maintain friendships. So, for example, when I came to the UK for my exchange, I met up with one of the fellows for English breakfast at Wetherspoons. And yeah, it was very nice to just keep in touch with them. I also occasionally have chats with fellows from other cohorts to welcome them to Included BC and to exchange relevant insights. So you, Andre, for example, is one of the ones from other cohorts that I've met.
No, definitely. And I can attest to that as well. And for context, for people who don't know about Included VC, it's essentially an 8-month program. So there is quite a long time to get to know other people, which is really nice because sometimes you never get exposed to aspiring VCs from all the different countries. And for example, if I never met Amy, I would never have considered Finland as one of my potential options.
And on that, how do you kind of balance the fellowship whilst studying and doing other things in kind of the VC space?
So it was relatively easy. Included VC only required 20 hours per month, plus around 10 hours of your own job search. Also included VC sessions were always in the evening, which never overlapped with my classes. So really, I had no problem balancing the fellowship while studying, and it didn't really take a lot of my time. But you do need some commitment.
And what's one thing that you liked most about Included VC?
Is the people. So that includes the fellows and also the mentors. I think it's very valuable for me to belong to a group of people who share the same interests in tech and inclusion as me and who are super entrepreneurial, driven, and inclusive. I think it's very rare to have this group of people with you in your career. It's very valuable.
That's great. And could you tell us a bit more about how Included VC helped you break into the industry and venture capital generally?
So during the CV screening phase, I think having included VC in my CV is already very helpful because a lot of VC funds know about included VC. And then during the interview process, you have your fellows and mentors to do mock interviews with. And also the learnings you got during the fellowship prepare you very well for these interviews. And in fact, 87% of those who were looking to break into VC in my cohort broke into VC. So it's very helpful if you genuinely want to break into VC.
That's amazing. I'm sure there are hundreds, but after the many, many master classes and other sessions, what are 2 or 3 things that you learned during the Included VC fellowship that you didn't know before about VC?
The first thing that came to my mind is the definition of diversity. Before coming to the fellowship, I was only familiar with gender diversity and ethnic diversity. But during the fellowship, I've learned that diversity is more than that. It also includes, for example, education, age, occupation, or neurodiversity. So when I start my career in VC and start investing in startups, I look for those diversity factors when I invest as well, not just gender diversity or ethnic diversity, but the broader definition of that. Second thing I want to mention is how it takes a village to close the best deals. So before the fellowship, I didn't know that there's a lot of work going on behind the scene. So, scouting, personal branding, negotiating, building platforms, and so on. So, those are very new learnings for me and very helpful as well.
Amazing. And for those who aren't lucky enough or have missed the deadline for Included VC, what are some alternatives to the program?
I think you could try to work in the tech industry first. So, as startup operators or founders, if you're already there and want to move to VC, I think a lot of networking would help. So, for example, going to events, talking with people or taking free online courses like venture deals. I took those also.
That's amazing. And we also know there's many other programs like Future VC and the Newton Fellowship Program, which we'll definitely link in the description to this podcast. So do check that out. And hopefully that'll be useful for everyone who's applying.
And now we're going to move on to our quick fire round, where we'll give you about 20 to 30 seconds to answer each one of these questions. So I hope you're ready. But to start off, could you tell us one place where you have to visit if you go to Finland?
Lapland, where the Santa Claus lives.
A childhood dream.
Yeah, definitely amazing. And what about Vietnam?
Maybe my city, Ho Chi Minh City. There's a lot of things to do here.
What are some of your favorite things to do there?
We have a lot of good food, good street food, and you can eat with your friends here.
That's great. And if you weren't in VC, what would you currently be doing?
So my dream was to be an influencer, on Instagram, maybe talking about travels or beauty products, because I really want to share my knowledge with others.
That's amazing. You'll definitely have to link us to your Instagram account. And next thing, what's your favorite Finnish-based startup right now?
My favorite Finnish startup. Well, it's very hard because I have a lot of great Finnish startups that I like in mind, but probably Sifted is one of the most exciting startups right now. They are a platform for secondhand iPhones, and they have raised, multiple rounds of funding, very big, very high growth.
Wow, that's really interesting. And if you had any advice for a fellow Gen Z who wants to break into VC, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think fake it until you make it. You don't have to be a VC to start talking to founders. You don't have to be a VC to start looking at tech trends. So, do things that normal VCs are doing until you get there. Start writing blogs, going to events, talking with founders, talking to investors. People are very open to share.
I love that advice. And just one last question before we end. What's next for you, Amy?
After working in VC for a while, I realized I still need a bit of more business experience. That is why, as a next step, I will return to Bain & Company to do management consulting. So this is where I did my internship during my studies. However, I plan to remain in the tech ecosystem through my board position at Inclusive. It's an NGO that helps organizations advance their D&I journey, and I also plan to become an angel investor. So please do get in touch if you're building something cool.
That's really exciting, and we wish you all the best. And thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. It was great to see your really unconventional and exciting career journey so far, and I'm sure you'll have many more years of success.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Next Gen VC, a podcast from Gen Zs to Gen Zs. If you enjoy our content, do support us by hitting the subscribe button and give us a follow on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram at NextGenVCPod for updates on the latest episodes. Are you tired of always hearing about Silicon Valley VCs and not knowing what the greats of European VC are thinking? Well, no more. Head over to theeuropeanvc.com, the go-to place for everything European VC. You'll find podcasts, events, and expert-curated content from all over the EUVC scene. Well, what are you waiting for? Go to theeuropeanvc.com now.